Hi everyone, my name is Chris, and this is my session on using the punk rock DIY approach to encourage learner autonomy. Okay, let's start. So this is my session on using the punk rock DIY approach to encourage learner autonomy. Before we begin, just a little bit about myself. So my name is Chris, I'm Director of Studies at EC London, and I recently became a CELTA teacher trainer. I grew up in Nicosia in Cyprus, and at school I was always a bit of a misfit, being the English boy in a sea of Cypriots. And when I first listened to punk at around the age of 14, I just fell in love straight away, and I could relate to that type of music immediately. It enhanced my life in so many different ways. So before we begin, again, just to let you know, you don't need to like punk rock to take value from this session. And in true EC style, I'm going to set my objectives. So in this session, I'll outline the theory behind this approach and how this relates to learner autonomy. I'll discuss practical ways to integrate this approach into lessons. I'll answer any questions you may have at the end of the session. My objective here is that at the end of this session, you'll have formed an opinion on whether to accept, reject, or adapt this approach in your lessons. Again, a little bit of background and to set the context of this talk. This all started about 2 years ago when I went to ECCPD Day. Vic Richardson gave a talk on tutorials. Vic Richardson actually spoke yesterday in the conference as well at IATEFL. And the discussion moved on to what it means to be a self-regulated learner. And that really sparked my interest, and it kind of ignited this idea of parallels between learner autonomy, being a self-regulated learner, and the features of DIY punk. Those features I'll speak about in a moment. So following that workshop, I actually designed and taught 10 lessons on how to be a punk rock language learner. And I used this book, The Autonomy Approach by Brian Morrison and Diego Navarro. It was fantastic. I adapted a few activities from that book. I learned a lot from those lessons. As much about what worked and as what didn't work. At the end, I came to the conclusion that really the punk rock approach is something to be integrated into lessons as opposed to taught explicitly. So again, a bit of more background, this time on DIY punk. So what is DIY punk? It's a movement that started in the US in a few cities in the 70s, mainly Detroit, New York, Washington. And so punk bands, a lot of people were disillusioned by authority figures at the time in the US, and they had to express themselves. People had to express themselves, as they always do. And punk bands at that time were very much into using this DIY ethic, so not having any authority to lead you. They wrote their own music, they played their own instruments, they learned to play those instruments. They promoted their own live shows, writing their own fanzines to keep their supporters up to date. And the idea was to be as self-sufficient as possible. So you can see already here the link to autonomous learning. This is a flyer from 1992, so a bit later on in the 70s, but in 1992, if you have a look at this flyer, you'll see that it's for all girls and women in Washington, D.C. At this event, you are asked to contribute your skills, energy, anger, creativity, and curiosity. There are shows, live punk shows, but as on top of that, there are workshops. So this kind of event is created for and created by members of the community, and here in this case, the punk community. I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but I would love to go to this kind of event. It seems amazing, and even more so, I would be incredibly proud if my students arranged or were able to do something like this. And that links to Carmen Becker and Annika Albrecht's session this morning on making spaces for autonomy. And the examples that were in those sessions were incredible, and this kind of ties in with that. So what can this approach contribute to learner autonomy? When I designed those lessons, and I became interested in linking the DIY punk approach into lessons, I had to think first of features of DIY punk, and then consider what this might look like in our classrooms. So the features I identified on the left here first was inclusivity. DIY punk is created by quote-unquote misfits for everyone. This is how I came across punk. And inclusivity is a notion that has always prevailed in punk. If you know what ska music is, ska is a type of music that originated in Jamaica, and ska and punk mixed. The genres mixed in the 70s, 80s, and also in the 90s up until this day. And that's it's a prominent indicator of the notion of inclusivity and unity as well. And so what this might mean in class is that we create this inclusive classroom where we leave no student behind. So if you notice anyone left out in class for any reason, you arrange a one-to-one with that student, you chat with that student, speak to admin staff about it. Of course, a lot of us might do this anyway, and will do this anyway, but going a step further on that is what this feature might look like in the EFL classroom. So the next feature I identified was that punk is honest, direct, and practical. You might have listened to some punk songs. They're mainly very short, with lyrics that are to the point. There is some imagery and metaphor in the lyrics, but generally the message that a punk band is trying to convey is easy to understand. So this might mean in the classroom that we set objectives, teach overtly and transparently. And this links to Rachel Paling's session earlier this morning on brain-friendly grammar as well, signposting lessons. So if we're honest and practical and direct in this punk approach, then it means that we set our objectives, we teach them overtly, which means that we refer to the objectives throughout the lesson, we evaluate the objectives as well, and we teach as transparently as possible. The third feature was that DIY punk is communal. It's owned and enjoyed by the members of that community. So this might look like, what this might look like in the classroom is that we create a community, we prioritize rapport. I'll give you an example of one of our classes at the school at the moment. I know if you are teaching now, or if you have been teaching in the last year or so throughout the lockdowns, and if you've reopened schools, or if you've started to teach after your school has reopened, you will have noticed that many of those classes are mixed level, because in many language schools there just isn't the volume of students needed to create classes of one completely advanced class full of students who are at the level. At EC we've had an upper intermediate advanced class. At the moment we have an intermediate class that has a few pre-intermediate students in that class. So the reason I mention this is because the teacher has created this amazing atmosphere in class and has encouraged the students to spend time with each other outside of class, and he's really prioritized that in his class, and that has meant that when a pre-intermediate student goes into that class, the level of support given by the other students is just so important, and it's raised. So creating that community in class creates that supportive atmosphere, and that's really important. So probably the most distinguishable feature of punk music is that it's critical of authority, and it's constantly questioning and challenging instead of blindly following. You could say that many times the punk approach is rebelling without a cause, or being maybe promoting the idea that there should be no authority. Here I'm saying that the DIY punk is critical of authority, and consciously so. In the classroom, it doesn't mean chucking tomatoes at your teacher. It means encouraging a critique of the authority in the classroom. And this means not just the teaching, but the methodology, the materials, the lesson objectives, the level of challenge. So this essentially means, and links to being transparent, it means reflecting. So asking your students to reflect on those elements of the class is huge. So the next feature is a positive mental attitude, or PMA. So I am cherry picking here, unapologetically so. So this PMA, positive mental attitude, is a movement within the DIY punk movement, and this moved the punk community on from simply bringing down authority to fixing communities and solving problems within the communities. What might this look like in the classroom? So having a positive mental attitude, it means praising, but being conscious with this praise, doing it consciously. So praising effort, making the praise as specific as possible. For example, let's say a student has given you a piece of work, instead of saying correcting the grammar or something, saying that maybe they should have used more linking words, and then saying, well done at the end, which is not great, to be honest. Your comments could be something a bit more specific and praising the effort. So, for example, I can tell you worked really hard on this writing, and it's an improvement on the piece you gave me last week. You've used a number of collocations related to the topic, and you've used some useful linking words to connect your ideas. Well done. So that's what that would look like, praising effort as opposed to praising their intelligence, or simply giving them language feedback. That doesn't really go far enough. And you might see some links here to a growth mentality, and we'll come to that soon. So punk is passionate, loud, and fun. The punk show is a playground. So punk wouldn't exist without passion, and many punk bands start with zero skill, and they're not talented, but passion outweighs talent. I think that's the message here, and that's what makes punk shows so fun, loud, and energetic, is the passion. So this means in the classroom, you maintain your passion. Maybe you as a teacher challenge that idea. What am I passionate about in the classroom? What do I love and don't love about my job? But thinking about more specifically in the classroom, dig deeper into your students' passions as well. The loud characteristic here might go against the inclusivity feature that I've identified earlier, because not everyone is loud. Not everyone likes being loud, and we also have students with hearing impairments as well. But loud here in this classroom could mean giving your students the tools that they need to express themselves. So a tweet or a written social media post can be loud as well. So coaching students how to do this successfully carefully and appropriately and kindly as well can be really empowering. Okay, so I've spoken about the features of the DIY punk movement and talked about what can happen in the classroom from a teacher's point of view. I want to now move on to the features of a DIY student. This is again something that stemmed from the talk that Vic Richardson gave in 2019 that I went to. And I started thinking about the features, the characteristics of an autonomous student, a DIY student, and I know you can find these characteristics in different literature, but this is kind of using the punk rock approach to identify to describe a DIY student. So the DIY student takes control of their learning and sets goals. And here, this means finding out what your students' learning goals are the moment they step into your classroom. And when that happens, you'll notice that they might give you quite a generic response. So they'll say, maybe someone is there, the student is there for 4 weeks, and they say, oh, I really want to improve my speaking. So what do you do with that? That's it's not really enough. They need to be a lot more specific than that. So then again, you become the facilitator, the guide, the coach. How are you going to do that? What are you going to do every day to achieve that goal? When you say speaking, in which situations do you need to improve your speaking? And what specifically do you find difficult about speaking? So setting goals is essential. And incidentally, there is a punk rock band called Set Your Goals, and that's the picture that you can see on the screen. So a DIY student monitors and plans their progress and also evaluates their own learning. So this is where tutorials come in, and they're so important. So in tutorials, I don't know, what the context of your teaching is. However, in a tutorial, that gives us a really a great opportunity to ask students to reflect on how much they've learned, evaluate that learning, and also plan their progress for the future. And often we talk about progress plans for students who maybe are a little bit weaker, or they haven't maybe progressed as we would have expected. But progress plans really should be for all students, and tutorials are a very good opportunity to discuss this. A DIY student actively seeks feedback. So here we can encourage students to reflect on feedback and let them know that this is where much of their learning will happen. Of course, I'm not talking about the kind of feedback that you see in the picture, by the way, but yeah, actively seeking feedback is something that we can encourage as much as possible. So looking for advice and direction. Again, going back to tutorials, a lot of students will want advice but won't know how or who to go to for this advice. So here it's another thing that can be addressed in tutorials and one-to-one chats with students, encouraging them to look for advice. And then once that's happened once, the first time, then the student might feel more comfortable to come to you or to seek advice a bit more often. So a DIY student knows the learning game. I'm sure that in your schools as well you have level descriptors. This is indicators that show us the level of a student, and in theory, if you complete if you can do all of those things on this descriptor, then you are ready for the next level. Of course, this is maybe quite a black and white way of looking at it, but for students, this means knowing the learning game. So again, just as punk bands need to play the game of negotiating with venues, promoters and sponsors, So too, our students need to negotiate with their teacher, with management, and play the learning game where they look at their own level and they understand their level and they know what it takes to go to the next level and what that actually means. A DOI student strives to be resilient. So I've added strives to be here because I think resilience as a word is a bit of a double-edged sword and can sometimes be used to justify failure. You know, the student needs to be more resilient, or you know, it needs to come to their lessons, otherwise she'll keep she won't progress. But actually delving deeper into why the student is not attending school is a better approach. So instead of having that kind of idea that the student is to blame, we could discuss the challenges the student is facing and coach them into finding possible solutions to these challenges. So a DOI student learns how to learn, and in class this could mean dedicating time to developing metacognitive strategies, such as encouraging students to reflect on their favored learning styles. And linked to this is loving challenges and risks, so promoting a growth mindset in your classroom. And you know, by promoting growth mindset, I don't mean having a poster up on the wall describing a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. I mean integrating features of growth mindset into your lessons. So, for example, reminding students of their past successes. So doing that in practice as opposed to just in theory. So a DOS student knows that effort is necessary. Similarly to resilience, I think you know, we can easily go down the route of maybe blaming students for not doing this and this in order to move to progress. But really, we need to be discussing how our students are going to be achieving their goals. Booking a course at a school goes a long way to achieving these learning goals, but it does not guarantee achievement. So if we ask them how they're going to achieve those goals, then they start talking to us about what they'll do to achieve those goals. And as they're talking and describing what they're going to do, they realize how much effort they actually need to put in. Right. So considerations when using the PUNC approach. This isn't going to be for everyone, of course. The theory behind the approach is very niche, might not be applicable in different contexts. And the main consideration that, the main difficulty I had really creating this this talk and planning this talk is that the principles of PUNC have been, can be, and are being misinterpreted. So the DOI concept could lead to unprincipled practices. So not checking whether our methods are actually work or are based on research. It could also be rejection of authority leading to a fixed mindset. This is a quote by Henry Raby, or a tweet, a published poet, a self-proclaimed punk rock poet. So the 70s, 80s punk subculture stunk of individualism. A nice little conscious and intentional use of the past participle of stink there, I believe. Some of that generation became "I don't let anyone tell me what to do" boomers, which translates as "I won't listen, learn, evolve, adapt, grow, change, nurture, and I would rather reject communal society than build a new, better world." This is not the punk I'm talking about, and again I said that I was unapologetically cherry picking, and this is why. So before I finish further listening, I've got a handout, and I'll provide the link to that. You can go off and listen to a Spotify playlist that I've created called Punk Rock for Learner Autonomy. Lots of songs on there that exemplify what I've said. I'm not the only one who is talking about punk rock in education. There are two guys, Mike Earnshaw and Josh Buckley, who have a podcast called Punk Rock Classrooms in the US. Different context to ours, but it's there's so many similarities. You can see there: build your crew, make a scene, create Unity, DIY. Some more links that are on the handout here. And finally, if you want to keep in touch and follow the progress of my own project, then you can follow me on Instagram for updates. Okay, great. Thank you very much, and speak soon.